Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 22nd of March of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. As you know, during the previous 24 hours the Russians conducted massive missile strike all over the entire territory of Ukraine. The Russians mainly were targeting the Ukrainian energy facilities. They were attacking the new power plants and all over the entire Ukraine, the eastern, south and central and the western parts. So let's discuss every single attack. We have a lot of very interesting videos and the way how the Russians were attacking. First, let's start about the way how the Russians were attacking. If you take a look at this post, you're gonna see lots of arrows. Green arrows, this is ballistic missiles. Yellow arrows, those were the strikes of the drones and Geran strikes. Red arrows were the strikes of missiles. And as you can see, some of the strikes had ballistic, let's say, line. Some of them has a line like a snake. And you know that yesterday I found out that maybe it's not correct information, so correct me if I'm wrong, but according to information I have, the Patriot system can attack just in one direction. So how you establish this Patriot system, and if Patriot system watch, let's say, to the east in some certain angle, this is the only area this system will cover. And if you are able to attack Patriot system from behind, basically this Patriot system will be completely useless against this or that missile. And according to this information, of course the Russians have this information, the Russians try to use this snake let's say line of attack. And as you can see, for example, you can take a look at this red arrow. If you have let's say good screen, good resolution, you can see that the Russians were attacking from the east, and they bypassed some area, and then they attacked some position from the west. And for example, this is Zaporozhye-Dnipro area, and even if we move back to this territory, we will find a very interesting video exactly at the area of Russian attack of when the Russian, let's say, missile was flying not with ballistic let's say line. For example, in this area we have the video how the Russians destroyed Ukrainian air defense system, NASAM system. So this is the system. The system was destroyed probably today as a result of Russian missile strike, and as a result of not ballistic missile. So anyway, it's just details, and as a result, as we can see, of another attack, another air defense system was destroyed. And when we're talking about the real Russian goals and real Russian purposes of the massive missile strikes that have been taking place since yesterday, according to my understanding, is to suppress the Ukraine air defense. Of course, today the Russians managed to destroy not just the air defense systems, as we have just seen, and this is another, for example, video from the better angle and better quality of the video. The Russians also managed to damage and to destroy Ukraine energy facilities. And if you ask my opinion, to attack Ukraine energy facilities was the secondary target. I'll explain to you a little bit in a minute. For example, on this video we can see the Ukrainian man who was moving along the street discussing the situation. He was saying that there is no electricity in Kharkiv at all, and he was saying that this is the main reason why there is no electricity in Kharkiv. The Russians destroyed and damaged significantly the Ukrainian energy facilities all over the entire Kharkiv. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians damaged at least three electric power plants in Kharkiv. 3 power plants were damaged. Some of them were destroyed and maybe completely. Furthermore, we have report from the governor, from the mayor of Kharkiv, who's saying that Kharkiv completely turned off. And furthermore, we got more evidence of a disaster situation in the area. The internet, after the strike, the internet fell down almost till zero. And we have this is the power plant that the Russians were attacking. This is Kharkiv power plant number 5, and this is the same, another video from the area but from another angle. We see a very heavy fire. The Ukrainians were by the evening the Ukrainians managed to let's say to remove the fire and to let's say to stabilize the situation when talking about the consequences of Russian attacks. But for now the situation still remains critical. Also, the Russians were bombing not just Kharkiv, as we discussed just a minute ago. The Russians were attacking Zaporozhye, and the Russians destroyed either NASAM's air defense system. Once again, let's take a look at this video, short one, strike and explosion. And also the Russians managed to damage and to destroy the dam, another power plant, the biggest one in the Europe. First in the morning we got some pictures of the Russian strike, the consequences of the strike. As you can see, nothing happened to the dam. Dam is completely fixed, no damage. The dam wasn't ruined. The Russians just destroyed some engineering equipment, some engineering facilities that the Ukrainians used to run and operate with the dam. And according to experts, the Ukrainians are no longer available to use this dam, and of course they don't have possibilities to repair it, being under Russian fire and Russian attacks. Some sources are saying that all those attacks were not just like attempt from the Russian side to destroy the dam and to destroy Ukraine energy facilities. For example, during the previous weeks, the Ukrainians made significant number of attacks with drones against the Russian, let's say, oil refinery plants. Lots of oil refinery plants all over the entire Russia was damaged by the Ukrainians, and according to some rumors, the United States of America called to Zelensky, the authorities of the states called to Zelensky, demanding from him to start bombing the oil facilities, because this situation can lead to increase the price of the fuel and so on. And furthermore, according to the Ministry of Defense, all those strikes that took place yesterday, the day before yesterday, today, the Russians called not like missile strikes but like act of revenges. So maybe those were like attacks because of Ukraine attacks on the oil facilities or something like this. Furthermore, now we have two areas of strikes: Zaporozhye power plant, Kharkiv power plant, and we have lots of updates from the western part of Ukraine, but without any videos. For example, this is another, let's say, power plant, Ladizhin thermal power plant. There were also explosions. We don't have any videos confirming the explosions, but according to the sources, there were some. So now let's discuss what was the real purposes of the Russians, why they started attacking the Ukrainian energy facilities, and we see complete absence of Ukraine air defense. The Russians managed to damage and destroy probably one of the most important new power plants in Ukraine, and we see complete absence of air defense. And I'll remind you that just yesterday, the Russians attacked and bombed Kyiv with cruise missiles. For example, on this video, we can see once again, today a video was published of Russian strike yesterday. We see complete absence of any air defense, and at some point of the video, we can see a very heavy explosion with the Kinzhal. So the thing is that currently, as we discussed in the previous videos, I'll repeat once again, the Ukrainians completely focused with their air defense just on the line of combat contact. The Ukrainians don't have significant number of missiles or air defense systems. They are not producing the missiles or air defense systems by themselves. They can use just military aid for these purposes, and so that's why the Ukrainians are very limited. And don't forget that during the previous months, the Ukrainians lost up to 2 Patriot systems on Donbass direction as a result of Tornado airstrikes. We remember those videos. So the Ukrainians can protect just this part of Ukraine. The Ukrainians can protect any part of Ukraine, but for these purposes they need to redeploy forces from one part to another. And that's why Russians understand that the Russians are about to complete the battle for the western part of Avdiivka. They're about to complete the clearing of the area. The Russians are about to finish the battle for Novomykhailovka. The Russians, today, for example, we got reports about the Russians answered the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. The Russians are about to finish the battle for Robotyne and to create a cauldron. The Russians are about to end the battle for Ivanovska and to start clashes for Chasiv Yar. The Russians are about to finish the battle for Bilogorovka and to move further to Siversk. The Russians are about to finish and to answer Terny and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this part of, let's say, Zhiribets River. And of course, the Russians are about to start the storm process of Kupiansk. And these are about, so the distance between are about to start and real actions is air superiority. As soon as the Russians are able to establish air superiority all over the line of combat contact, the Russians will finish every single operation I've just discussed with you. But to do this, first of all, the Russians need to destroy the Ukrainian air defense. But before destroyed, of course, the Russians need to discover the Ukrainian position. So that's why the Russians started the massive missile strikes. First, the Russians attacked Kyiv. But the thing that we can make a conclusion based on the Russian strikes in Kyiv, that Zelensky decided not to protect Kyiv. he decided not to redeploy air defense systems back to Kiev. He decided to, let's say, to waste Kiev. If the Russians reduce Kiev till ruins, Zelensky will not send even a single Patriot system back to this area, because for now he understands that the most important is the front line. Because if the front line collapse at some area, the Ukrainians, there are very likely, there are very high chances that the Ukrainians will be able to stop the front line, maybe along the Dnipro River. So that's why Zelensky currently doesn't care about anything, whether there are explosions in Kiev, in Kharkiv, anywhere. So that's why the Russians let's say made a conclusion based on the yesterday attacks and decided today to attack. So they raised the stakes. The Russians raised the stakes and start bombing and attacking the Ukrainian energy facilities to understand whether the Ukrainians, whether Zelensky will keep energy facilities also without any protection, but to keep air defense forces along the line of combat contact. And today we saw that Zelensky decided to not to protect the energy facilities. And even if the Russians are able to destroy every single power plant all over the entire Ukraine, including the nuclear power plants, Zelensky will not send air defense forces to protect them, because he understands that Ukrainians can survive even without electricity, without warm or hot water. They don't need this, but Ukraine will not survive if frontline collapse. So air defense systems are on the line of combat contact. And today we got update that the Russians started preparation before the third wave of attack with missiles. Very likely the upcoming missile strike are going to be the vital. They will tell us who has, let's say, a stronger balls, either Zelensky or, let's say, Putin. No, we can't say about Putin whether Zelensky had a strong balls or something like this, because obviously the Russians will attack the most critical areas, the most critical facilities, energy facilities. Probably maybe the Russians are going to attack something very important, and they will try to find out whether Zelensky are going to reveal his positions of air defense and to send them to these areas for protection. But the thing is, if Zelensky does this, if Zelensky take the rest of his air defense and, let's say, send this air defense, let's say, to Yuzhno-Ukrainsk nuclear power plant or to the nuclear power plants in the western part of Ukraine, he will lose it. He will lose either air defense, either power plants, and of course the front line. So this is probably the most important part of the special military operation, when everything will be resolved. The Russians understand they need to establish air superiority. They have just started the production of FAB 3000. They have significant number of FAB 1500. They have lots of aircrafts. For example, today the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported about another batch of Su-35S that were produced and sent to the line of combat contact. So the Russians have everything, just not one thing. They need air superiority and to destroy air defense systems. So we'll see what is going to be next. We are waiting for another wave of Russian missile strikes, and then everything will be clear to us. Now let's move to the line of combat contact, and probably the most important update is that the Russians, as a result of offensive operations, somehow managed to establish control over the hill that located on the northwestern part of the village by the name of Ivanovskaya. And we discussed this area many times. When the Ukrainians were controlling the territory, they made everything they can to stop the Russian further progress in the central and in the southwestern part of the village. But now the Russians, as a result of, let's say, cross-field attacks, so they were attacking something like this, managed to enter this area to force the Ukrainians to fall back and to establish control over the territory. Very likely the Ukrainians will try to make more counterattacks with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back. This is the vital foothold either for the Russians and for the Ukrainians. And if the Russians are able to dig in deeper, we can start counting minutes when entire Ivanovskaya is going to fall. To reduce the Ukrainian pressure on this hill, the Russians also launched another ground operation in Klishchevka itself. After very heavy artillery preparation, the Russians launched another attack, and today, maybe tomorrow, we're going to start receiving updates from Klishchevka itself. And this operation, the Russians started after they managed to establish control over the railways, and now they're storming Klishchevka at least from two directions. This is the first direction, this is the second direction of Russian attack, and this we can say that there are many roads to attack, and most of them is under Russian control and Russian fire. We haven't received anything from the south and Siversk direction, but we continue receiving a lot of updates from Belogorovka. The Russians are storming the area. During the previous days, the Russian attempts were repelled by the Ukrainians. The Russians, having significant losses, were forced to fall back. During that attack, the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian positions in the area, the Ukrainian, let's say, anti-tank positions, the Ukrainian FPV drone operators positions, the Ukrainian artillery positions, and during the previous day and today, maybe the day after, tomorrow, they will clear this area, and after the clearing operation, the Russians will start another ground operation. Belogorovka is a vital question for the Ukrainians, and this is a very tough nut, as we can see. And the main reason of so successful Ukrainian defense is this part of Belogorovka landfill, because when talking from this picture, from this satellite view, it's very difficult to understand which part of the hill of this landfill is the, let's say, the big one, which one is less, which one is very high, which one is not. So for your better understanding, this is the only part of Belogorovka hill that is has a very big, let's say, height from the surface of the ground, and the rest of the area is lowland, even sometimes lower than the Russian positions. But on these positions, the Ukrainians managed to establish a very powerful defense belt that the Russians still haven't managed to bypass. And according to information I have, and according to geolocations we received, the Russians are trying to cut this landfill from the support of Ukrainian forces. So the Russians are planning, and we're trying to attack this area from two directions. So this is the first direction of attack, and this is the second direction of Russian attack. Regarding the losses, regarding the difficulties in this operation, basically the Russians just want to cut this area from the mainland, to dig in deeper. Regarding the losses, to send more and more reinforcement, and just to clear this area as soon as possible and as soon as they can. So this is this operation, but for now, the Ukrainians managed to repel every single attack. Now the Russians, as we discussed, are working on the discovered Ukrainian positions, but very likely soon the Russians are going to start new attack. And the interesting detail about the attack, that this attack is not like any other Russian attack on any other line of combat contact. Basically, the Russians are attacking using the trap method, not like a trap. So there are a lot of Ukrainian positions, and almost every single day, what the Russians are doing, they're sending another convoy of forces towards this hill from the south. They're sending forces, let's say, from the east, from the north, and they're using these forces, these armored fists, with one purpose: to force the Ukrainians to attack the Russian convoy. And during all these artillery and FPV drone strikes against the Russian convoys, the Russians try to discover as many as possible Ukrainian positions, and after that they start destroying and clearing the area. And basically this battle will be finished when either the Russians or the Ukrainians will be completely out of resources, reserves, some materials to continue clashes, and then they will be basically forced to fall back and just abandon their positions. We haven't received anything, almost anything, from southern Kupiansk direction, just few geolocations confirming additional Russian progress. Nothing happened on the northern Kupiansk direction. The borderlands, we have just additional important updates that during the previous 24 hours we haven't received even a single geolocation on the Russian side of the border. We have some geolocations on the Ukrainian side of the border, which confirms that main activity and main clashes left the Russian territory, and now the main activity is taking place on the territory of Ukraine. On this video we can see another Lancet strike. In Alexandrovka we have additional bombing of Ukrainian forces and soldiers, and to the west of the main activity we see the evacuation trucks that Ukrainians were using to evacuate the Ukrainian losses somewhere to the mainland or something like this. And now we are moving to the south in Avdiivka area. As today we haven't received anything additional in comparison with the previous videos. The Russians continue improving their positions, they continue maintaining the gray zone. There are still a lot of job to do. The Ukrainians abandoned lots of traps, there are lots of FPV drones, so that's why the Russians are not so fast, they can't be so fast. But anyway, during the next few days we're going to receive significant number of updates of additional control by the Russians, at least over the fields between Peski, Vadiane, Tonenькая, Severnaya. We're going to receive probably geolocations of Russian complete control along Durna River between Orlovka and Tonenka, and obviously we're going to receive geolocations between Berdichi and Orlovka, let's say along Severna village. So everything will be cleared and captured by the Russians within the next few days. Furthermore, the Russians published additional video of how they managed to discover the Ukrainian command centers or headquarters somewhere in the vicinity of Selidova, and as a result of 2 Iskander strikes, that headquarters were destroyed. So the Russians wasted 2 Iskanders at same area, and very likely something important was happening there. We haven't received anything from Novomikhailivka area, just regular artillery activity and military routine. Interesting, and of course counter-artillery duels. We have lots of destroyed Ukrainian artillery positions with probably the systems of multiple launch rocket system strikes, Krasnopol hits, and so on. And the most interesting updates from the South Donetsk direction we received from Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Today the video was published of the Russians. 2 soldiers were storming Ukrainian positions to the southwest of Staromayorsk, and on this video we can see 2 Russian soldiers managed to complete the clearing of the trenches and establish control over positions closer to Staromayorsk. Some Russian war journalists are saying that the Russians, as a result of unexpected attack on Staromayorsk, managed to enter the village from the south and to establish the foothold in the village. So if we turn back to map, according to some reliable sources, currently the Russians control something like this in Staromayorsk, and the Russians continue advancing further to the north. Very interesting details. Very likely the Russians will continue offensive. Recently the Russians reported that they managed to establish complete fire control over the road between Rovnopol and Staromayorsk. During the previous days the Russians established complete aviation bombing control over the tree lines and let's say the defense belt to the southeast of Urozhaina, and now the Russians are moving further along Mokry River to Vremivka tactical bridgehead to Velika Novoselovka. So the Russians renewed their attempts, renewed their offensive, and very likely the next days we're going to receive more updates about the direction. When talking about Zaporozhye, Kherson, we haven't received anything from the area, just a regular activity, just a regular military routine without any changes on the ground. And of course, when talking about Russia, today we got a very interesting report from the official Russian authorities. According to, let's say, press secretary of Putin, Russia is now in a state of war. Everyone should understand this. Russia will continue to act so that Ukraine's military potential cannot threaten the security of its citizens and territory. Peskov, press secretary of Vladimir Putin. So the Russians are at in a state of war, and for now Russians haven't, let's say, clarified whether they're in a state of war just with Ukraine or with the rest of the world, like with the Western countries, but very likely he was talking about the Western countries. But from the other side, we got more updates from the NATO. You need more than just shells, you need people to replace the dead and wounded, and this means mobilization. This was stated by the head of the NATO Military Committee, Rab Buyer, at the Security Forum in Kiev. Also, he added that the head of this person also stated that the alliance is ready for conflict with Russia. So I don't know what does it mean. I don't know what does it mean what the Russians were saying, what the NATO is talking about, but I know for sure that this night is going to be the 3rd wave of missile strikes, which might be the final, let's say, strike before something very interesting and something very big. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.